Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast. My name is Michael Visconti. I am the Director of Business Solutions and In-House Compliance Counsel for here at Icon Professional Services. Today, as you know from your invitation, our communications with several of you beforehand, we're going to be discussing ending Maverick spend and eliminating that liability that's connected with it from your organizations. We've got a multitude of people joining the call today from various sizes of organizations, small, medium-sized businesses, and a couple of our VMS and MSP partners as well. We'll reserve time at the end to answer any questions you may have. And without further ado, let's get started. I know we're all very busy. If you have any questions, you can simply type them into the chat window. We will likely answer those via email afterwards, depending on how much time we have left. We are trying to limit this to 30 minutes. You can simply hide the panel. You can include your audio mute, which should be already activated. Feel free to send me any questions or simply click the hand raise option if you'd like me to slow down or tackle anything individually. Here's my contact information should you want to contact me specifically regarding some aspect of your corporation's compliance program, lack thereof, or better adjusting your procurement spend with regards to balancing that with existing VMS or MSP systems or your internal processes. You're more than welcome to email me or contact me directly. My direct line is 650-378-4417. My email, mvisconti@gotoicon.com. Today we're going to break this down into two pieces. Both should last about 10 to 15 minutes and no longer. First, we're going to discuss how managers are currently going around the existing business practices and procedures at many small, medium, and large Fortune 500 companies to avoid both their legal departments, their HR departments, and procurement when it comes to getting whatever talent they deem most appropriate at whatever price they deem that they can get away with without actually raising any red flags. We call this the purchase order effect. It results in what we call shadow contractors. These are contractors, consultants, freelancers, or simply nameless, faceless purchase orders that go completely under the radar in many cases and are not included in any of your matrices or any of your analyses when it comes to balancing labor spend. Often you have a good handle on payroll, payrollees, W-2 employees. Often your temp employees, those that are either sourced in-house or sourced through a staffing agency, are often well documented. But often what happens is these shadow contractors who are engaged through purchase orders go completely without notice, and we'll discuss later many of the issues that come into play. How with regards to HR, who would normally be concerned with not only the quality but in compliance, how they skirt HR completely, and legal, most importantly concerned with large class actions and regulatory compliance, particularly the IRS, Department of Labor, and state agencies, how it avoids them entirely. But most important, and the focus of this will be procurement and how the increase in spend goes completely unaccounted for until you're actually getting your line items and realizing that your spend on labor, or even at that point, whether it's a service, a product, or labor, is completely unknown, and how to actually get the reins on that and eliminate managers from going around the system. When it comes to spend visibility, we like to use the motto that you can't control what you can't see. When managers use these purchase orders, there is absolutely no way to tell who's being brought on board, what the scope of their work is, whether that could be better allocated to existing employees, to temporary workers, to payrolled contractors, or to true independent contractors. Ideally, and we'll discuss sort of the dream scenario, which is getting every one of these employees into one single bucket under one umbrella for procurement to better allocate them depending on productivity, depending on changes in the economy, depending on increases in demand for your company's products or services. We're also going to discuss how, when you do implement a program like this, you want it to be at low or zero cost, and we'll discuss actually how to get a zero-cost compliance program that does increase spend visibility, and how it can be done so with the most minimal amount of effort and effortlessly integrated into either your existing in-house system of labor management or VMS or MSP systems that you already have in place. One of the things that ICON prides itself on is very effective and proven partnering with the largest MSP and VMS providers that we have here in the United States and abroad. Second part of this is going to discuss the risk reward and the return on your investment. This is really the crux of procurement and what they are most concerned about. When it comes to risk, we're talking about increases in costs for the company. Ideally, you would look at the cost of an employee, but of course, or an independent contractor. But when that independent contractor is improperly classified, when there's absolutely no program that ensures that they are properly classified and not running afoul of the IRS, the Department of Labor, or state agencies, what you're going to do is increase the cost of that worker because you're going to have back pay, you're going to have increases in fines and penalties, and you're going to have the relative costs from any ensuing legal obligations or lawsuits or class actions or individual actions, which have seen a monumental rise, and we'll discuss those as well. We're also going to discuss the economic trends, particularly the job report numbers that have come out in the last quarter, how the economic trends have continued during this time of relative economic recovery, although it is kind of a fluctuating, and we've seen that from the February jobs numbers with exceeded expectations compared to last month's job report, which came out on Friday, which was lower than expectations. Regardless, how when it comes to independent contractors or managing your workforce, often it is incredibly cost effective not to cement the costs of full-time W-2 payrolled employees when it comes to adjusting and being flexible with these ebbs and flows of the economy. Often an independent contractor or even a payroll consultant can be the solution for saving costs down the road and not cementing fixed costs from the onset of that engagement. We're also going to discuss very quickly in no uncertain terms how using independent contractors, how using payroll contractors can produce a visible cost saving. It's cost savings you can actually show on the executive level saves 15 to 30% off a W-2 payrolled employee, full-time employee, of the same or even a lower salary per year, or even the identical hourly wage. Finally, we're going to include a very quantifiable and simple to explain to on the executive level return on investment that exists beyond the simple cost savings and extends into the cost of that employee, of training, of the lack of all of the other procedures and workers' compensation, insurance, and benefits that would normally be attached to a full-time employee. Finally, if we have enough time, we're going to include a question and answer session. Often in the past, we have had a wealth of emailed questions, and if you do send those over, we will make sure to answer them all in the next 24 hours, as we tend to do, and we pride ourselves on doing for most of our clients as well as our prospective customers. First of all, let's talk about shadow contractors. As I alluded to them in the initial part of the agenda, what they're using is purchase orders to simply avoid procurement. Often these have a simple service listed on them. They will often list a product. Whatever they do, they are not alerting anyone in HR, legal, or procurement that the purchase order is attributable to a single consultant, freelancer, contractor, whatever you call them. They all fall into the same bucket, and they all fall victim to the same fines, penalties, regulatory obligations, and increased costs when it comes to misclassifying them. Not only are we talking about independent contractor versus employee misclassification, we're talking about exempt versus non-exempt misclassifications, which I will discuss later. We have recently been brought in for many of our clients on these issues. Some of them, as you will see, are facing not only competitors being burdened with sizable lawsuits, particularly in the exempt versus non-exempt field, but in misclassification lawsuits and class actions. As we all know, many of us are involved in sales in some way or another. Many people involved in procurement one way or another. And as we'll see with a lot of these managers and the individuals who they contract with, whether directly acquiring these consultants and freelancers or whether going through a specific agency, often that agency or contractor will take very good care of the manager. Whether it's tickets to the latest game or baseball game that's going on, as we're all keeping a close eye on our teams across the country right now. That can be a very tempting proposition, as well as simply taking them out to dinner, taking care of them, sending baskets, what have you. It's a buddy system. These people go to them. They're not concerned with the cost because, frankly, they are not responsible for it. When they use purchase orders, you will see a sizable increase in what are being paid to consultants and contractors, considerably more than what would be applicable in a market scenario. Just today, both the New York Times covered this, but in their later sections, but the LA Times has it on their front page below the fold, and our local newspaper front page above the fold, how the latest initiative in California, which you may or may not have heard of, we have people from all across the country here, for high-speed rail initiative. Huge congressional insight is going to happen into this because they're noticing not only giant changes in how they're allocating the money, but they've specifically targeted contractors who are getting upwards $400 per hour for consulting services with absolutely no oversight. The consultants in question are not only advising on which individuals should be hired for various aspects of this incredibly expensive multi-billion-dollar project, but it turns out that many of these consultants, which were acquired through these shadow procedures, these nameless, faceless purchase orders, in fact worked for the companies which they are recommending. The real key here is get visibility into these people, find out what's being spent, mandate programs, and move on from the existing manual processes which are keeping them completely in the dark. What we've discovered with shadow contractors is there's 3 ways in the industry that you can try to prevent them. The first is prohibiting the type of purchase altogether with your business practices. As we've seen, often businesses have these rules in effect and clearly not being complied with by all the managers. Some of them simply subvert the system by avoiding it in more of a secretive fashion, while you've got others who flout the system very overtly. In addition, another way we've got it is penalties for this type of purchase. Some companies have tried this but as you've seen, they are simply still paying these costs for their employees. They're simply paying all this money towards their contractors and avoiding the system entirely. What we've discovered is the most effective way is the third one, which is an approval or check and balance system that is forcibly installed in the company, but with minimal invasiveness when it comes to onboarding and offboarding or existing MSPs or VMS systems. Simply having a checks and balances system through which all purchase orders go through prevents any of these from slipping through the cracks or avoiding procurement, HR, and legal entirely. The other issue is that even in systems where there is an implemented process, the problem is that human resources is much more concerned with things such as the value of the labor and compliance, while legal and in-house counsel, again, concerned with the risks of audits, the risk of regulations, the risk of task force that have become much more prevalent across the country. With procurement, as we'll discuss here, the real issue here is cost and how much money is being wasted by companies on these contractors through purchase orders that they have no control or visibility into. The effect of these purchase orders is fairly straightforward. You're losing economies of scale right off the bat. You can no longer negotiate for favorable pricing with single suppliers or 1 or 2 suppliers or even them against each other. This results in clear and concrete overspending. When these managers are going to their own contractors directly or going through their own preferred staffing agencies using purchase orders, this prevents procurement departments from having any power to leverage their hiring of contractors, whether independent contractors, temporary employees, or payroll W-2 contractors. Much more importantly, which often goes unnoticed by all 3 departments, is the issues with security breaches as a result of these Maverick spend and unknown purchase orders. When you are unaware of when the person is actually hired or engaged by these managers, you are also unaware of when they are let go or when their services are no longer needed. With a more traditional process, there is a straightforward offboarding. Without any sort of implemented system when it comes to these shadow contractors, Issues such as retaining company property, a laptop, or making sure that they're returning all access cards and they're taken out of the system also goes around HR, procurement, and legal. Intellectual property could be a major issue for your company when these contractors are off-boarded or they are no longer engaged by managers, and they still have a significant amount of your company's most crucial, critical data that you would probably like to keep under wraps and safe and secure. The legal and regulatory risks, we won't get into too much detail about this, even though attorneys such as myself would love to scare you with all the details. But pretty straightforward. You got multiple agencies, multiple government agencies, federal agencies, the Department of Labor, and every state agency, including many new misclassification task force. They have different levels of classification. They have different rules and regulations. They have different standards. They are overlapping. They are often clashing and contradictory. And on top of all of that, you've got a wealth of legal knowledge out there and class action plaintiff attorneys who are seeking to follow up on any chink in the armor, particularly following behind IRS audits or Department of Labor or even Immigration Customs Service audits. Most recently, in the news up here in California, the third largest steel foundry in the United States was the target of an ICE silent raid. They came in for their I-9s. They discovered that 1/3 of their workforce did not have their I-9 forms properly filed, or not properly engaged as workers in the country. And as a result, only a couple months later, right on Christmas Eve, a plaintiff class action lawyer representing a large number of those dismissed employees as well as other employees filed a sizable $30 million class action against the steel foundry. That class action is still ongoing, and likely, as you'll see, many of these will settle closed doors, and you will never know the amount. But with the ones we do know about, such as Microsoft, which was a major case several years back, they can be in the amounts of tens of millions up to almost $100 million for some of these misclassification lawsuits. Finally, as we've discussed over and over again, the real key here for procurement is that the purchase orders prevent a complete lack of visibility, and with that, a lack of flexibility. When it comes to the ebbs and flows of economic recovery, as it does right now, you're going to want to have, in an ideal situation, the ability to onboard and offboard the type of employees you need, whether they be contractors, workers through typical contract independent contractors, whether you're dealing with consultants, freelancers, or temp workers through a staffing agency. You want to be able to balance all of those and mix your labor force accordingly to save the most amount of money while increasing your productivity. And to be able to do so, you must have total visibility of all areas of labor spend. Now, in this perfect situation, obviously you're staring there at what you probably have, which many procurement departments will see, visibility into their payrollees and their temporary workers. Often consultants, contractors, freelancers will go completely under the radar. When you're looking at these in separate buckets, there's absolutely no way to determine whether an increase in one group of employees results in an overall increase in productivity and profits for your company. Well, you can do small studies, and matrices will help you determine whether, say, for example, an increase in your labor force or decrease. As we've noticed in recent years, employers have been able to do much more with less. It's definitely slowed the pace of hiring, but the increase in productivity, and every labor study for the past year has showed that employers have found a way to squeeze more work out of their smaller workforces than in any years past. Ideally, you want to compartmentalize these all under one umbrella, as we mentioned before, putting them all in one bucket and being able to allocate them appropriately. What does this flexibility allow you to do? Pretty simple. It allows you to balance your workforce. When you know exactly what percentage of your labor distribution for a certain quarter, certain time period is spent on various types of employees, various types of workers and contractors, you can compare that to increases or decreases in profits and productivity for your company. You can do studies for long-range studies, short-term studies, and determine exactly who you need, in what amount, for what amount of time. And often, when you're talking about these project-specific tasks, short-term defined tasks, you're talking about consultants. Consultants and ICs, whether through payroll or through independent contractor agreements, they allow you to do staff augmentation, which is backfilling a position when someone's out, sick leave, maternity leave, vacation, family medical leave. They allow you to use project-specific work, which is when you have a defined project, you're allowed to define start and end dates. In this economy, often you don't want to keep them on any longer than you need to. And often when you lack internal skills or resources for certain projects, you don't want to hire someone when it's going to be a specific short-term project. This also allows you generally to have workforce scalability, so you can expand and contract your workforce as the economy increases. This has been seen recently with seasonal industries, and we'll discuss that later, how industry leaders such as, for example, Home Depot and Lowe's, and in the insurance industry, Allstate, have used independent contractors and payroll contractors to bring on significant increases in their workforces despite not wanting to cement long-term costs. Obviously, when you're dealing with this, you want to find a way to do this in the lowest cost or no cost way possible. You also want it not to take time away from your managers or from your procurement, HR, or legal departments. The best way is to have a seamless VMS integration with services such as what ICON can provide you, as well as several others in the industry, although with ICON you're dealing with a direct partnership with VMS and MSPs. I think we've narrowed it down to about 10 lines of code when it comes to integrating with their existing systems and software. You're dealing with a single point of contact and a single automated workflow. When it comes down to it, you want that kind of seamless integration because it creates one user who can use the entire process to onboard, offboard workers and ensure compliance by simply using email systems you already have in place. And we'll walk you through that process on the next slide. In addition, you're going to deal with the fact that you want unified governance when it comes to contacting or having your MSP contact someone for compliance services. Rather than dealing with different departments, siloed divisions, you want them to be able to come to one place for one answer, one simple solution, and they can do this all through, as we'll discuss shortly, an email process. Furthermore, what you want with the technology solution is you want these solutions to come very quickly. You don't want to take your internal processes, manual paper processes that take a very large, significant amount of time. But you also don't want to sacrifice, speed and convenience at the cost of going with one-size-fits-all solutions. As we'll discuss shortly with regards to certain major class actions that are going on right now, both Apple Computers and AT&T are dealing with major class actions whereby they were advised to simply incorporate their independent contractors, require them to sign up as LLCs, require them to sign these yellow dog contracts not to join unions. And by way of that, they were advised that they would be shielded from misclassification liability. As any of your HR or legal department managers can tell you, even with the simplest solutions in states and the federal government, there is no one factor that outweighs all others. Simply advising them to use these LLCs has landed them in lawsuits which could cost them upwards of $50 to $100 million at this point. Furthermore, though, industry norm classification results often result in about a 30–40% independent contractor classification. While this will save you quite a bit, what you'd like, though, is if someone falls into a gray area between a W-2 and independent contractor, and you can save a significant amount of money, upwards of 20 to 30% on classifying them as an independent contractor, if there is one or two minor changes in their contractor agreement or employment agreement that will confidently place them as an independent contractor and avoid misclassification risk, what you'd like to do is ideally be able to go that route. But many programs do not allow you to do that. They simply give you a yes or no. They do not go through the process, as we'll discuss shortly, to make sure that you can save money on these gray area independent contractors. Furthermore, you can deal with ongoing compliance support rather than a one-time solution. You want to ensure that all of your documentation is kept. These audits can go back upwards of 3 years. And what you want to deal with is the fact that in audits, as we'll discuss later, 1 in 4 companies will fail them. Often this is the result of a lack of documentation. As I mentioned earlier with that largest steel foundry here in California, they've lost 1/3 of their workforce. Part of this was a complete lack of documentation for these workers. However, a similar story with an Arizona dairy producer also had an ICE silent raid, an I-9 silent audit. They showed up at his dairy farm. He was alerted by his office manager via text while he was at a nearby dairymen's conference. But because they had implemented a very concrete documentation system 2 years earlier, they only lost a scant 4% of their workforce through this audit compared to 1/3. This gets us into why you want to have an audit defense file. When it comes to misclassification, what they're looking for is often the unprepared company, the company that does not have a wealth of data. As you'll see in many lawsuits, you'll see large companies simply dump mountains of documentation on smaller firms to prevent them from going forward with their lawsuits simply because of the sheer cost of culling through all of those documents. Same thing happens when it comes to with regards to audits by the IRS, the Department of Labor, and state agencies. As we all know, they're on short budgets. They're all trying to narrow their budget gaps as best as possible. However, when you're able to provide them immediately with massive audit defense files for each and every one of your workers, evidencing why those workers are properly classified, it'll do a lot and has been incredibly successful at dissuading them from continuing with their audit or lawsuit. This is one of the reasons why our company, ICON, is very proud of our 15-year history and a 15-year record of 100% audit defense successes. We attribute much of this to the fact that we have these ironclad audit defense files, and we highly recommend that companies make sure that procurement, HR, and legal coordinate and ensure that these are in place. Now, I said I'd walk you through this real quick, how this is done. I will show you this in about a minute because, frankly, it is going to be something that you will never have to deal with because it will be implemented effortlessly into your existing VMS software. First of all, you've got a hiring manager. These are the people who are previously going through shadow contracting and shadow and these nameless, faceless POs. They are required to put them through an online evaluation system. This is immediately sent to the IC Verify, which is our system of compliance. It incorporates and is constantly updated. It was worked on and produced with the help of KPMG and the labor law firm Littler Mendelson to go through the various steps and questions necessary for your various employees, workers, and contractors, depending on where they are, regardless of where they're located in the country. What they do is they send that over to the contractor or the prospective contractor. They complete the online evaluation, all simple, all through email, very quickly and done. They're given a preliminary scoring and recommendation. Like we mentioned before, many people take that preliminary scoring and their companies will either give you a yes or a no. With this, you've got either a yes for IC status, and that's a clear, unambiguous IC. What they'll do is require that contractor to submit all the necessary documents that will go into that audit defense file that we talked about that was so crucial. That defense file will be kept safe and secure, and remember, audits can date back 3 years, so it will be retained for longer than 3 years. That'll give you your final recommendation, goes immediately back to the hiring manager. Person is immediately onboarded without any of that added uncertainty or risk or lack of visibility when it comes to procurement departments. However, if they fail IC status, there is that, like you said, gray area. With ICON, we take that as a challenge to make sure that if we have the ability to make this person an independent contractor, we will do so with minor changes. We can do that. They'll submit their documents, go through the exact same process, same building of the defense file, same protection from audit 3 years down the road. If they can't, you're dealing with a final recommendation. That takes you to the possibility they need to be payrolled. The option here is that you likely want to keep them as a contractor. What you can do, however, is use ICON or any agent of record service or employer of record service to employ that individual as a W-2 payrolled contractor working for your company. Often this will take a bare minimum of about 1.85 days on average. And again, this is focused on your managers. We are your compliance manager, and obviously this is all done in the background. This does not need to be burdening procurement, your existing HR, or your legal or in-house counsel. Now we're getting into the money aspect of it with the risk reward and the return on investment. With the risk, as we've discussed a few times now, you're dealing with the enforcement landscape, which is incredibly significant these days. There has been a massive increase in government and private actions targeting misclassification of workers. We've seen information sharing agreements, coordination of law enforcement and audit efforts by state and government agencies, and as well as state attorney generals. We've also seen coordination directly between the IRS and the Department of Labor. This has all been a sizable increase in the last few years, and it has been partnering with the latest White House misclassification initiative. 13 states have already signed on to join that. And the White House has allocated millions of dollars towards this. Recently, misclassification initiatives in the budget have increased over $300 million. Class action lawsuits are also a significant rise in recent years, as we'll get into. We'll talk about the economic trends and recovery strategies, which you're dealing with, as we discussed with the latest February job numbers and March job numbers. Despite these increases seeming to be very modest in March, but exceeding expectations in February, over half of those were temporary or temporary workers, or in this case, contract workers, for short-term jobs and possibilities. The workforce planning studies by institutes such as YO or Manpower Initiative have also shown increases in the same economic recovery strategies, which is not to cement the costs of full-time employees and rather divert them using contract employees. But obviously this is sort of a carrot and stick scenario. Just like the chicken and the egg, the question is always out there for procurement people, which is better, independent contractors or employees? Well, when it comes to independent contractors, engaging them comes down to the carrot, which is the clear cost savings compared to the aforementioned risk. When it comes down to it, you're talking about a 20 to 30% cost savings over a sourced full-time employee, and we will break that down for you in a very simple Excel spreadsheet, just simple cost breakdown between the two, and you can see that obvious savings. Furthermore, if you're doing them by an hourly rate, you can get a 15% increase. And all of that results in additions to your total return on investment when it comes to engaging independent contractors. So what we have is the most frightening of all the group here is the compliance efforts from the IRS. What you're dealing with is, in recent years, and this is about 2 years ago, they announced that they would be doing 2,000 audits a year, totaling 6,000 audits. We have no reason to suspect that after next year, 2013, they won't continue this process due to all of their recent successes. They've engaged in information sharing agreements with multiple states. 37 states in total have signed memoranda of understanding with either the IRS or the Department of Labor. And of course, the IRS and Department of Labor have also shared information as well. So you're dealing with this web of different organizations. They're leveraging their enforcement efforts. They're leveraging their audits and their employees, and they're allowing them to have a significant increase in audits every year since these plans and agreements have gone into effect. With regards to the states, as we mentioned before, there are a multitude of different standards, regulations, but individually they will attack companies specifically auditing unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and using their information sharing agreements with the IRS and Department of Labor to target companies for state labor claims. Furthermore, we've seen a significant increase in enforcement task forces. These have included not only civil but criminal penalties for companies and employers. And with regards to changes in the states, we've seen significant increases in legislation. 2011 alone, California had 22 new state employment laws on the books. For the Department of Labor, we saw their Plan, Prevent, Protect audits go into effect in 2010. They have seen a significant increase in recent years. The Department of Labor's budget was reduced last year. However, the amount of money spent on misclassification was increased. So it's clear the DOL, as well as the federal government as a whole, is sort of putting all of its eggs in one basket, and that basket would be the one that tends to get them the largest return, which is millions of dollars in fines and penalties through audits and enforcement efforts. The Wage and Hour Division, as we mentioned before, gets into the exempt versus non-exempt debate. ICs, by definition, are exempt from overtime, but recent class actions, particularly dealing with the computer employee exemption, have shown that there's more than just naming them as a computer employee or programmer. You have to actually make sure they comply with the very attenuated law to make sure they are exempt. This has resulted in cases that ICON has been brought into, specifically when it comes to adjusting for and even analyzing the amount of risk these companies are exposed to when it comes to these audits and lawsuits. Finally, we've seen from the Office of Federal Contract Compliance an increase in compliance audits of about 40% in the last 3 years, as well as a blacklist of certain companies when they violate compliance laws. In the last 3 years, we've seen that audits can date back that many, but what you don't know is that 46% of all workers fail a misclassification audit, and for those who can request their own audit, and this is done by a simple SS8 request to the IRS, 95% of those contractors who request a specific look into whether they are misclassified, 95% are determined to be misclassified and that they should properly be employees. And that's a pretty startling number. We will be producing this presentation later, so you can go through the specifics from 2009, 2010, 2011. But what you'll see over those years is a steady increase, not only in the budget from the federal budget, but in state budgets towards misclassification. We've also seen this increase in coordination. We've seen an increase in lawsuits and class actions, both small and large companies, and a significant increase in the number of regulations and state laws under which companies have to abide. As we've seen from the IRS, the Department of Labor, and state agencies, we mentioned 37 signing Memorandum of Understanding and Information Sharing Agreements, 13 joining on with the White House's Misclassification Initiative. Audits have increased exponentially. We've seen about a 43% increase in that. The agreements, as we mentioned, have allowed them to leverage their enforcement efforts, and there's been almost a there has been a 44% increase in the number of audits. Arrests have increased as well. Recently, Massachusetts made the news where employers who misclassified numerous workers were jailed for 2 years. And with regards to class actions, in the last 10 years, there has been a 325% increase in wage and hour actions alone. From March 10th of 2010 to March 10th of last year, there were over 7,000 filed. We're pretty familiar with this here in California. 40% of all wage and hour actions are actually filed in California itself. Here's where we promise you the visible cost savings. We'll make this nice and straightforward. With a full-time employee getting paid $85, we're comparing that to a contractor getting paid $10,000 more at $95. With a full-time employee, you're getting a recruiting fee that you're having to pay to your staffing company. I think 15 is a pretty loose estimate of that. It often can increase to 20 or 25 for the highest paid employees. With regards to benefits, it's costing the company about 20%. Workers' compensation costs, for our example here, we're dealing with California, can add to 1.75 of the annual pay. With the state disability insurance, that can add to 6.2% of the 7,000%. You've got annual increases in pay for about 1%. That's incredibly modest given this economy in regards to top talent, which can also obtain top pay. And if your company has a 401k matching, you're dealing with about $495. This doesn't even begin to include employee stock purchase plans, the cost of bonuses, severance agreements. But even without those unknown intangible costs, you're dealing with an increase from a $85,000 a year full-time employee based on their salary, a total cost to your company of about $124,000. As with the contractor, all of those are included, and you're staying at 95. So you can see the immediate cost difference, and even with slight adjustments in, depending on the state that you're in, you're dealing with a 20 to 30% savings. Finally, we're going to get into pretty straightforward how you've got a very quantifiable executive level that you can, to the executive level, you can just show a very quantifiable value from classification risk mitigation. As we mentioned before, 1 in 4 companies in the United States will fail a misclassification audit. Your penalties can increase to about 75% of the spend on your independent contractor. So, for example, you have an independent contractor, you paid them $100,000 for the contract. If they are improperly classified, if you add together all of the costs of penalties, fines, back pay, cost of benefits that they were not provided, if they were misclassified, that can add up to 70% of the spend that you put on that contractor. In that case, $70,000. So basically, you want to make sure you've got them in the right bucket and they're properly classified. As we mentioned before, there is a huge tax gap across the nation right now. About $450 billion by the last estimate. Of that, $68 billion is from independent contractor underreporting alone. This is not unknown to the federal government. It's not unknown to state governments, state regulatory agencies, or federal regulatory agencies that we've mentioned previously. This is why, despite reductions in their overall budgets for 2013 as proposed, there has been a significant increase in the percentage of those budget allocations towards misclassification alone. With regards to wanting to get the most out of your independent contractor workforce, you want to have a higher pass rate. You don't want these yes or no end-of-the-line decision-making from many companies and compliance programs. You want someone who is only slightly in the gray to be able to be properly contracted with, changing their agreement to properly place them into the category of independent contractors. Furthermore, you want programs that can fund themselves. Because these programs pass through payroll contractors to the payroll agency, and they are payrolled at a typical payroll markup, that means that these compliance programs will fund themselves at no additional cost. That's something else that will be very effective when showing on the executive level that not only are you saving money with independent contractors, both by avoiding the risks and the clear 20 to 30% cost saving reward, you're also saving money when it comes to the fact that the programs are effectively funding themselves. Finally, you're saving significant amounts of money over your typical traditional sourcing of employees when you go through compliance programs. For example, their payroll markup and low markup. There are no conversion fees when it comes to the implemented programs, such as that through ICON. You've got no direct hire fees through programs like the one at ICON. And depending on the length of the separation from the client, you may also have background screening available, which, as we mentioned before, falls into the category of security when onboarding and offboarding these contractors. Furthermore, you're going to deal with significantly reduced training requirements and a much faster interview cycle and onboarding cycle. Tell you a little bit about ICON real quick before we close. ICON was founded in 1997. We're headquartered on the peninsula here in San Francisco Bay Area. We're north of the Silicon Valley, south of San Francisco by about 15 minutes. We've been here since 1997 with our headquarters here. We have clients in all 50 states across the country. We're a recognized leader with a 100% audit defense rate, as we mentioned before. Our clientele ranges small and medium businesses to Fortune 1,000 companies. And we've integrated our software seamlessly with leading MSP and VMS vendors throughout the nation and abroad. Finally, with many procurement departments, it's important to note that we are a diversity supplier. We are a certified women-owned business and have been for over a decade or more. And with all of that, what you're basically getting is sort of an answer to this question, which is better, independent contractor or employee? Because when you actually have a definitive answer to that and you're mitigating all of your risks, you can effectively say that an independent contractor will be saving your company 20 to 30%. We have actually gone into our over our allotted time, and we have definitely increased our number of questions there via email. I will answer those as they come. But a couple which just came up quickly. I want to answer the one about IRS. Someone asked about what other audit triggers could signify an IRS, DOL, or state agency audit. A very important question. Really, there are a multitude of them, and they are everywhere. The IRS whistleblowing program affords whistleblowers up to $10 million and a percentage of notifying them of employers, who are violating the law. As we mentioned before, the SS8 request can be done by any independent contractor. This could be a Maverick, spend shadow contractor. Also, if one of those people happens to file a workers' compensation or unemployment claim once they are disengaged, off-boarded from your company, that can signal the IRS or the state agency right then and there that that person may have been improperly classified and begin an audit into the entire program. Finally, and often overlooked as we mentioned before, 1099s and W-2s, if you've issued them overlapping 1099 and W-2 to the same employee, particularly in the same tax year, as we all know, we got a couple more days to file for those people to file their taxes. That can often be an obvious red flag to the IRS or state tax agencies that the person may have been misclassified. And again, all of that leads to the fact that the IRS is losing about $3.4 billion each year in misclassified employees usually per state. You got a 6.8 overall in the past years. The audits look back about 3 years, so your company can be exposed to a significant amount of risk for simply misclassifying a couple of these employees that you have no knowledge of because managers are going around the system. And as we mentioned before, 95% of workers who request audits are reclassified. So again, in closing, we just want you to know that we're available for any questions you have specifically when it comes to procurement, saving costs. And you can email me or contact our offices, number 650-378-4417, and we're more than happy to do both audit engagement or employment services evaluations for various companies, whether it's focused on spend or focused on the amount of risk your company may be exposed to because of these shadow contractors and Maverick spending. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it, and we'll see you for our next ICON series webinar.